Hello and welcome to our most latest of many episodes of We're Not Pros. I am Matt.
I'm Joseph.
And I would like to relay to everyone a very interesting story. So, as I've said on the show several times, I used to help run a lot of gaming events in Toronto, mostly board game related things, but we did do a couple of video game related things. And at one point we were doing a celebration of fighting games in general. And one of the games that we brought there was BlazBlue, which was the spiritual successor to Guilty Gear while Guilty Gear was stuck in rights limbo. But we had a whole bunch
We're glad you made it out, by the way.
Yes, thank you. But we had a whole bunch of people playing it and saying, this is really interesting, this is really weird, this is really fun. And we had somebody there who full-on discounted the game, saying, this doesn't really look like a good fighting game. This looks like one of those anime fighting games. Like, I'd rather be playing Street Fighter. And if anyone out there is pausing because it doesn't make sense, allow me to explain for those who didn't pause. At the time, there was no anime for BlazBlue. There was several animes for Street Fighter, both shows and movies, as well as several comic book things. And so not only was it a pretty bad reason to discount the game, it also was completely inaccurate. Like, he was basically saying he didn't want to play it because it just looked anime, and he'd rather play another game, which was technically more anime. But he was discounting a fighting game because of that tag. And that's what we're talking about today, the idea of labeling video games as anime, especially when, in this case, it's not based on an anime, so why is this a thing we're calling it?
Okay. Now, for those of you who don't know Street Fighter, and we're not going to get too much into Street Fighter, but they've tried different ways to adapt to Street Fighter. They did also go a live-action route with a film earlier on, it's a 90s, and then they tried to make a video game based off the live-action film, the same way Mortal Kombat used to do live-action.
Yeah,
so they've tried to it, but Street Fighter definitely has its roots in Japan, and the initial art style is so close to anime anyways, and also the ability for people to throw fireballs and be able to fight while having gigantic breasts. This is also animes that I would attribute to, qualities that I would attribute to anime.
Yeah, I feel like the concept of ki has gotten a little out of hand at this point.
The concept of?
Chi.
Oh, chi, right, yeah.
Yeah, the whole idea of this inner spiritual force that kind of Dragon Ball popularized as being able to then weaponize into energy projectiles. It's like, it was cool when you had little Kamehameha waves that were like the size of someone's two hands together, but when you've got Kamehameha waves that need to be represented by cutting to an orbital view of the planet to watch the rest of the beam traveling into space, and they survived that? All right, so I guess just we're looking at that as the label of anime on a game, that this person was discounting this game because it looked very anime to them. And this is hardly the first time I think anyone's really made that observation. I've heard it sort of occasionally, people discounting games. Rock, Paper, Shotgun on occasion has, commented on games, like if you're okay with the anime style, which is...
If you're okay with the anime
yeah,
style,
it's really
right.
I don't know if you remember when we were doing the Sex and Life podcast, and there's the whole furry episode, and I commented that society seemed to look down on the furry tag. Like, there was Dust: An Elysian Tale, a great game that a lot of reviews said, if you're okay with the fact that they're furries, and this really frustrated me because it's a great game, and you're prefacing it with, well, you have to be okay with anthropomorphic animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had this problem too. Like a few people, not just one person, but a few people, all encouraged me to get into Hunter x Hunter, and I did, and I loved it, and I would definitely rank it up there among other shows or cartoons or movies that I quite liked. And there were people who I know who just would not watch it because they said, I just can't do anime. I was like, well, I mean, why? Why give yourself that? I mean, you should still assess every piece of work on its own merit, as opposed to where it comes from. Like, I've tried to talk a number of people into watching One Punch Man because that show is just a great premise, and it doesn't matter who goes for it.
I am really excited to see how popular One Punch Man has gotten, because at its core, well, not at its core, on its surface, it is a satire of shonen action anime, which is a genre that takes itself way too damn seriously. So having this show rip into it is nice, but at its heart, it has feeling, it has a lot of great emotion. But so taking it back a step, what exactly does it mean when a game gets labeled anime? Like, obviously you've got stuff like
perhaps we can, and you can shoot this down if you like, but perhaps we can take a step even further back and ask ourselves, what is even an anime?
Well, maybe we can take a step back further and say, what is life? But I think we should stick to your question
Oh,
for the sake
life
of
is the
time.
pursuit of meaning and experiences in exchange for suffering, so that our energy is converted into. Sorry, never mind. Go ahead.
Okay, now we're getting philosophical. I need to
I
reset.
stopped myself. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, let's start with that. What is exactly anime aesthetic? Now, at its core, anime really is kind of an extension of Japan. If you look at the overall style, the big thing is the eyes. Holy
Oh
shit,
wow!
that was
Good
good
job,
timing.
back people. Nice.
I love this crew. But the big thing really is, example, the eyes. It is said that 10% of the animation budget goes just to the eyes.
And for good reason too. Eyes are important.
And the Japanese culture really does believe that you can see a lot of a person in their eyes. That we say it's the window to the soul. They really believe that over there. So that's just kind of an example of the art style. It's very much based on showing emotion, showing exaggerated emotion. I'm sure we've all seen animes, well, they'll do the crazy things where the eyes like turn to little triangles because they're stressed out, or like they turn.
They're so happy that it's like two upside down U's.
The spirals, it's all very exaggerated style based on displaying a lot of emotion, based on even exaggerating it. That's not really something we see a lot of over here, even in Western cartoons with the exaggerated style. I mean, you look at something like Venture Time. There we go. I can't believe I forgot that name. Whose overall art style is very liquid, very fluid, and very much based on.
Nobody takes a hit that long. Believe me, I've tried.
But even they don't really seem to do the same kind of facial exaggeration that we do see from a lot of animes. They don't really display emotion the same way that they do.
Okay, and I think I understand where that comes from, and because anime derives from Japanese culture, there are some things that we can understand about the Japanese that will help us kind of understand this. One of them is that they are an introverted culture by nature. They have their own island. They have a low immigration rate. They are, some might say, xenophobic.
Okay.
It's not unreasonable to say that, although when tourists go there, they welcome them in with open arms. Everybody who I've talked to who's ever gone to Japan said they had nothing but a great time.
I will say that even though they're xenophobic, they also have a very rich culture of sharing their culture. Like, it's been said that a lot of Japanese people will give traditional Japanese items as gifts, such as clothing, or even a katana can be a gift to give to someone. They do love to share their culture with people, and it's always fun, the whole cultural appropriation debate where you just point to Japan and say Japan loves sharing. Like, it's not appropriation. They want us to have it. Like, seriously, we love our culture. We want
yeah,
you to
they
love our
consider it a
culture too.
dishonor to not accept a gift.
Yeah.
They value honor. They respect people who work their butts off. You can see photos of people in business suits, better than what I have here, if you can believe that, and they are passed out on the street. And people take photos of it, and then that guy works real hard. If you sleep in your office while you're working on a project, that's considered a great act of respect because you care so much about the work, you are willing to eschew modern comforts and just pass out at your desk.
They actually have this device that they're making in Japan that is specifically designed for doctors, and it kind of allows them to, I guess, kind of sit while standing. Like, it allows them to bend their knees a bit, and the thing locks in.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
It was meant
Like
specifically,
braces, yeah.
it was meant specifically for doctors to basically facilitate the fact that they're working ridiculous hours all the damn time. So here's a way for them to rest their legs a bit and relax a bit. And a lot of people were saying, like, oh, I love this for school, I love this for this. This was meant for people who are in surgery for 8 hours stretches. Like, that's what it was designed for. That's what it was made for.
Mm-hmm. They have a low crime rate. This is really, I mean, obviously we're talking about anime, so how can we not get into this? It gets to a point where a police officer is just kind of, because they just don't have any crimes to solve.
And extra credits went into amazing detail about this, but they had this whole idea of, like, their weapon of culture is sort of the katana, the sword, and we got the more Western one, which is the gun. And the gun is a tool, but they really do treat the sword and all other weapons in Japan as sort of an extension of yourself. Even when you are using a gun, the idea is this is kind of part of who you are. It's not just a tool you toss aside and you pick out another one. There's something special about this. You have chosen this weapon. I'm trying to remember these, like, I want to say Tao mentality, but that doesn't sound right.
Taoist?
possibly. Like I feel like I'd want to double check that, but
Okay, that's not well.
Yeah, it's more of your weapon of choice there is more of a spiritual extension of you rather than an interchangeable object. And even in the case of, you can see in a lot of JRPGs and a lot of, games from Japan, even anime, like their guns usually have some kind of engraving on it, and this is their thing. They don't just lose it and they pick up another one from a store. This is kind of, it's their thing. This is meant to reflect a part of their personality.
Right. Now, like any culture, they're not perfect. They do seem to be one of the more shy cultures. Even when they open up great, which is a factor that's true of shy people, believe me. And but generally they are having some issues with courtship, and they're having family issues. There's a lot of people in the culture who are kind of walking away from, because they see what happens when somebody works so hard and then they don't make any time for themselves, and they seem to be stressed out and they have heart attacks. So there's a lot of people who are rejecting the traditional family structure. There's also a lot of, especially males in Japan, where they are falling in love with fictional characters to the point where they will, I kid you not, marry their fictional characters in an official ceremony. I've seen footage of it. They do this.
Okay.
Now, how does this come back to anime? Well, what I found about anime, and for every, I would say, 10 that you've viewed works of anime, I've probably viewed one.
I imagine it's probably closer to 5 to 1,
Okay,
but
understood.
it's, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I'm not as much of an anime expert as Matt here is, but from the anime that I have consumed, what I found is that there is a willingness to express themselves as fully as they possibly can in their works, whereas they struggle to do it in their life. Whereas I find that over here in Western culture, the person seems to have has the ability to express themselves in the way they dress and in the art that they want to make, with films that they want to get involved in. I'm talking about people who work in media, but in general, you find that people are more willing to be open, and we have social media where people are happy to say whatever it is they want, right?
Yeah. Well, I think at its most basic core, if we look at all the things that we mentioned prior, what we have is a different culture. What we have is something that looks and feels radically different than what we're used to. So pretty much anything that comes out of Japan is going to feel different to us, is going to feel exciting or a little weird or a little silly. Like even like some of the more moderate animes that come out of Japan can come over here and we just think like, wow, that is over the top, that is crazy, whatever. That's kind of par for the course over there. And in many works, like just foreign films in general, if you look at stuff that comes out of France, look at stuff that comes out of Africa, just all these movies, they are reflective of the culture, and they do feel nicely different because of that. And I do think your point about lack of restraint within anime or within anime-style things is pretty accurate. It's kind of because it is a drawing, you have a lot of license to go batshit crazy. You want towering mechs fighting giant aliens, which may or may not be angels or alternate versions of humanity's evolution. You can do that. You want, weird transformation sequences. You can do that. Like, you can do all these really weird things. You're practically expected to do these really weird things because you have an unlimited budget. Like, it's whatever you can draw, you can do. Whatever story you want to tell. You want to go to space? Let's go to space. No, we don't have to build a soundstage. No, we don't have to assemble some artificial gravity. It's all drawings. And I feel like there's a lot more room to experiment and a room to really just get crazy with it. Like, there are plenty of cartoons in the Western world, like coming from Canada and America, and they all still seem to center around people standing in realistic environments, standing and doing things in realistic places. They don't really seem to...
Yeah, like a King of the Hill, where it may as well have been live action.
Yeah, but Japan has always been willing to not only go to different places or go to crazier places, but also I think to get a little more adult, to get a little.
Well, I just want to say that I think that one of the issues with cartoons in Western culture is that there is a lot of pressure if you're using the gatekeeper system of pitching a show to a network and then having the network fund it. It's their money on the line, so this cartoon does need to sell. the target markets are difficult because you might be able to get the 12 to 16 demographic, and then you get people kind of outside of that. There's always like a secret second demographic, like SpongeBob SquarePants is a kids show, but there's another demographic. I wanted to do one too. What I'm finding is that people who take to anime take to it and they don't really care about it. If they take to the subject matter, then they're set. And so you might, and yes, there is some element of relatability. Like if it's a manga or an anime series about high school girls, there's some people who are probably not going to want to view that regardless of where they are. But I would say in general, anime is a lot more universal. And I understand that there is a reluctance for some people to want to consume works from other cultures because there's that culture shock. But I think people like you and I, who I would consider to be, intelligent, understand the universality of storytelling, and that anime just so happens to be one of the largest markets out there. And I think if the French cartoon market managed to penetrate the way anime did, and then maybe we'd be talking about French-ime or Franime or something like that.
Well, Cyber 6 was based on a French comic book.
I think there was a film that just came out, maybe like within a 6-month window. Not that because I love dating these episodes. There was like a sci-fi movie, and they wanted to be really successful, and the director was really passionate about it.
Valerian,
that's it. Yeah, I think that was a French comic too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A French director too. But so now that we sort of established what the groundworks for anime, how does this usually apply to video games? Like if someone calls a video game anime, what are they usually saying? I sort of, from my observation, it seems like it's a shorthand for, saying this is Japanese, or like a politer way of saying, oh, this game seems very Japanese. So
Well,
like Street Fighter doesn't seem very Japanese because it got people from all over the world and they're really muscle
that's a
bound.
good
But
point.
Blaze Blue feels very Japanese because it's got girls with quasi-robot suits that can summon turrets.
Okay, so I'm going to try to answer that by relating it to my most recent experience. So a good friend of mine, as a gift, he buys me Fire Emblem Awakening on the 3DS. Loved it, still do, still playing it. And he warned me that this game is very anime. I'm like, okay. So I plug it in and I sit through the opening cutscene, which I encourage people to go look at. And it jumps from like some key elements of the game just to give you a sense of what this is about. And it's like a little blue luminescent fairy flies around a castle and then flies around this like standing army, and then there's an evil army that shoots a bunch of arrows and the standing army falls, and then there is this masked person running for their life against a bunch of evilness, and she jumps through a portal and it cuts to this the exalt, or the queen of the good guys, and a single teardrop falls from her face and it lands on a ripple, and then there's a bunch of heroes and they all got their sorry, they asked me to be careful about moving around too much, but again, it's the anime episode, so I apologize. And they're swinging their swords around and they face down a giant dragon, and I texted my friend after and we're like, you were not kidding. So I think
But it was awesome, right?
no, it was great. I dug it, and it got me ready to play it. And then, like, slight spoiler, in the second level, there's a zombie invasion, and they come careening out of the portal. And I texted him, and I went, man, this thing went from 0 to 60 quick. And so I think why I agreed with him that he said that this game was very anime was because there was a willingness for them to kind of like show all their cards up front. Like, this is going to be you're going to fight a dragon at the end. Oh, this person's really upset. She may even kill herself. There is a bunch of evil zombies. And it just kind of like, it let me know everything that it was going to be because it had already had its voice put together. Now, one thing that happens in a lot of Western television, maybe not so much with cartoons, but definitely with like dramas, is that they kind of have an idea of what their show is going to be, but they change it and they evolve it on a season-to-season basis. You see this in dramas. One example of a drama that I couldn't quite finish was called Weeds, and the first 3 seasons were like one thing, and then they completely changed tacks in season 4. So the voice of the show changed, and what I found is that anime definitely changes, and things go completely different from like season to season. but they know what they're doing. Like they have their voice figured out, and they're gonna let you know what it's gonna be up front, and then it's going to evolve and change over the course of it in some restricted, but also some crazy open ways. And just because that was a contradiction, I'll just say like the Dragon Ball series, the voices, these characters are faced with challenges, they get stronger. Bigger challenges, they get stronger. World-ending challenges, they get stronger. Rinse and repeat.
Well, I do think there is a bit. The rule of cool, there we go, that's what the term I was looking for. There's this idea with the rule of cool with anime stuff and games that come out of Japan, games that sort of have the anime style to it. Nice example, there was a mech fighting game, well not fighting game, I guess it was like a third-person action adventure thing. But one of the opening cutscenes had a mech with a railgun, and it was charging. And I was watching a video, it was the two people who used to do Loading Ready Run. They used to
I don't know.
Well, they used to watch openings to video games and do commentary on top of it. So this one mech had this large railgun, it was charging, and all like nearby dust and particles just started rising around him. And they said like, oh, what's going on? And it's like it's just an anime thing, or it's just like it's a Japan thing. And there's sort of two things going on simultaneously. On the one hand, it was a railgun, which means it was creating a powerful magnetic field that outside the casing and outside the containment of the gun was starting to affect nearby particles. This is a whole bunch of techno bullshit that I just threw out to justify the fact that it's awesome to fucking watch. And that's a lot of what goes on in anime and JRPGs, and even just the extension of Japan. As we said, they are a somewhat repressed culture, so when they express themselves, it's like full on, in per penny, in per pound kind of thing. Like, we're going to have this attack charging, and just nearby dust and particles is going to rise because it looks cool. I mean, yeah, we'll pencil an explanation to satisfy the science, but it's primarily because it just looks cool.
Right, so just think back to your family dynamic where there was a threshold for what you were comfortable with viewing or playing on the public television, the living room television. For me, I could kind of like play most or watch most of the stuff, but eventually I retreated to my room because if I wasn't getting made fun of, I was being questioned, or it was just embarrassing for them. And so I can imagine that is multiplied in their culture. So for them, they value their privacy, and so when they want to view something, they definitely don't want other people to know about it.
Okay, I'm not totally sure, but because it is Japan, anime and video games, all that stuff are far more accepted in Japan, so I'm not quite sure.
Oh, okay, yeah, no. Let me correct that then. How do I?
Like over here, there is,
give me a
as
second,
we
let me
mentioned, a bit of condescension towards the idea of anime and things that have come from Japan as being
Okay, so
weird.
let me just finish the thought. So
Sure.
let's keep it out of the in Japan. Let's just stick it to Western culture, and we can say that content that comes from Japan less likely to show up on the family television versus content that comes here.
Yeah, well, I think you and I really revel in the culture shock. Like, we like the idea that this is different, this is weird, this is kind of fun like that. But a lot of other people just won't really get it or won't really understand it. They'll look at something that has a lot of these kinds of tropes and not really appreciate it, and not really appreciate that it has come from another country. I know I've heard a lot of complaints about various standards and things that go on in Japan. And the thing I keep coming back to is it's another culture. You can't really hold our standards or our beliefs up to them. I mean, as long as it's not like violating human rights or stuff like that, you're kind of cherry picking your targets here. If you don't like that the outfits look, were designed with more appearance in mind than actual practicality, well, that's something they're having fun with the art over there. That's something that they're doing it through an exaggerated fashion. I think kind of run my point to the ground.
No, as soon as you said that, I was thinking about Kill la Kill.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an outfit that's clearly not practical, but there's a lot of people who are very satisfied about it.
Well, Kill la Kill, I think, is a great example of something people don't accept because they made fun of that outfit. Like, the first time she transforms into it, everyone's like, oh my god, what are you wearing? And, like, they have nosebleeds and all that stuff. She's like, shut up, I didn't want to wear this. I don't have a choice. Like, they actually spent a lot of time making fun of that. And even by the end of the series, they created an in-universe explanation for why those outfits were scantily clad. And you can write that off again as like, oh, it's just fan service and they're retroactively justifying fan service the same way that they retroactively justified the rising particles around the charging railgun. But the thing is, they did justify it. They did provide an explanation. And even at the weirdest part in Dragon Ball Z, where Krillin's able to put together the Destructo Disc and slice people apart with it, which, if you actually think about the Destructo Disc, section, one of the most powerful moves in all of Dragon Ball Z, because I've yet to see anything it doesn't cut through. It's just, the only problem is it has too much charge time. But
and he's also getting great practice for when he retires and wants to become a pizza maker.
but like everything does get an explanation. That's one of the things I sort of like about anime, and even like JRPGs and stuff like that. Everything gets some kind of explanation pretty much. Everything gets an answer to it. Even though it's primarily subscribing to the rule of cool, there is some kind of logic going on behind it, which is really satisfying in many respects. Especially if you played the Xenosaga series, they've got a whole dictionary in there for all the lore, for all of this stuff, for all of this stuff. And there's a really weird part during a cutscene where a bunch of characters are figuring out what some other people did, and one character says, so that was their plan the whole time. And that actually added an entry to the dictionary where you read it. So, you know, this character is referring to the fact that these people did this, 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 and this, and this. Like, if you're following the story, you came to the same conclusion he did. But just in case you didn't, here's a dictionary entry that tells you exactly what he meant with that statement. Mm-hmm. It's a adherence to explaining what is going on,
right,
and a promise that, yes, there is going to be an answer to this.
And it's going to be worth it, too, right? Because it's because storytelling is set up, establishment, and then pay it off. And anime, the anime that I viewed, and I'm very specifically thinking about Hunter x Hunter, they took their time, they set things up, and they were constructing the reality for the viewers as they went along, so that just when you thought you had a grasp of the height of how this world works, there was a new element to it that I found it didn't mitigate the previous part of the shows. What it did was it fleshed out the world. So just to give you a brief explanation of that, you have this thing called Nen, and there are different ways the Nen manifests. Some people they turn into like heavy hitters, and they can the main character ends up being able to throw a devastating punch. Some people are projectors, and they're able to create energy that then takes shape, like if they want to shoot knives or whatever. And then as the people develop, if they are willing to adhere to their natural strength, then they become very powerful and they develop a skill set that's completely their own. And if they veer away from it, they can still get the powers that they want, but they have to put in a lot more work. And what happens is that you have this natural person going up against somebody who worked really hard to get the skills that he wanted to. The natural clobbers him. And it's just an interesting little life lesson about that. And what it does is it uses these rules to try to teach people something about how life works, because I think that's true about life. You can lean into what you're naturally good at, and you can have a much easier time. And then if you feel like it, maybe take up some challenges, or you can grind really hard against something that you really want to have, and that could take you 10 times as long to get it. So by the end of Hunter x Hunter, as far as I watched it, they established enough that, like, if a fight happens, they worked for it, and it's going to be so cool to watch. And it's great that if I were to watch like another show, and I don't want to say it's an anime or something else, and this character just happened to have this power, yeah, it's still cool, but it's not as cool as putting in the work to fully understand what's happening and appreciating the gravity of the actions.
Yeah, I sort of remember going back to Adventure Time, or one of the few episodes I saw. Finn ends up acquiring a grass sword, which it apparently binds itself to him, and he can't get rid of it. And it's this whole episode like, oh, it's cursed, whatever. And they finally find the person who gave it to him. It's like, this sword is cursed. I can't get. And he says, ha, you can never get rid of it. He says, okay, what? Oh, hey, now I can control it now because I've accepted the sword as part of me. And it felt really hollow, kind of. Like, I guess that was part of the joke they were going for. But especially if you compare it to anime, if this was some kind of curse that he had, he probably would have to spend either multiple episodes, on episode or maybe multiple episodes, kind of fighting with it, coming to terms with it, figuring it out. And in this case, he spends the whole episode of curse sword, and at the very end, like, okay, I accept it, and then hey, I can now control it completely and 100%. Like,
well, not that I want to be the biggest defender of Adventure Time, but that's just like a structural issue, right? They only have like 10 minutes to do an episode, and it has to be like a cohesive story. So that's just like a structural thing. But I get what you're saying. It's like, well, there's only so many ways this can end, and it has to be satisfying to the viewer. And it's just like it's a micro version of the point that I'm making about if you spend like 6 seasons constructing the world, the payoff is that much more satisfying versus spending 2 minutes to construct the rules, 3 minutes to play with the rules, and then at the end it's a life lesson. It's satisfying. It's like a little satisfying. It's like a little piece of cheese versus going to a restaurant and having a fine meal.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It does seem that there is a better attention to world building. A lot of just games coming out of Japan, because the world is a character to them. Or it really feels like, if you look at a lot of games, the world actually has a meaning. It has a role to play.
And there's a desire for escapism because of how structured their society is. That escapism then flips in their worlds, and so they can really escape into a completely other world.
Huh.
And we like that too. That's why a lot of people in our culture take to it. Like, it's not that different,
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird vicariously living in a different world. And like I've said many times, I'm not that interested in reading autobiographies and those kind of stories, because they're people who exist in this world and who are actually real and exist in this world. And I much rather would try to go to Middle Earth or Narnia or just like all the other, like exciting places, because I live in this world. I'm kind of aware what this world is. And yes, I'm aware that 20 years ago this was a different world, or things were a lot different, but I'd rather go somewhere else. I'd rather escape. And a respect for the world that takes place in is always nice, rather than just a backdrop where people happen to run around and do something.
Mm-hmm. And that's why, like, say, the Lord of the Rings films can only get so much done, and they expect people to hopefully get into the books. Because in the books, they world build like you wouldn't believe. Or wouldn't believe. It's actually quite believable. Text is a great way for world building. I have to be careful with my colloquialisms. So with Hunter x Hunter, by the time I got through like the first 3 or seasons, or I don't know, there was just a point where I thought, when I understood how the world works, I would have loved to see this as an MMO, where a player signs up, takes a personality test, and is told what their nen would be, and what would be their natural skill set, and then develops a skill set and becomes a hunter and moves and steps out into the world and takes on crazy assignments. And if they really wanted to go hardcore with it, if you lose your character, you're dead, because that world was, I know it's an MMO. Like, they're probably not going to do it. But, that's just fantasy in my head, and anything I want goes.
Well, so video games are a bit of a power fantasy, and they are meant to kind of exist as a product. Like, permadeath is always something really difficult to tackle in games, because it does feel like you've taken away from the power fantasy. It does feel like you've, I guess, enforced a huge level of consequence.
Yeah, I mean, that point I'm just spitballing. I mean, we just, we'll see, right? What I'm curious about is, what anime would you love to see turn into a video game? What kind of video game would it be? Doesn't necessarily have to be a fighting game.
Well, fighting games are a really easy one to go with, because a lot of these, like the shonen action genre, like the Dragon Ball Z, Bleach, Naruto, that kind of thing, is a really big thing, and it lends itself to a fighting game very easily. We've seen so many iterations of Dragon Ball Z fighting game, with the latest one, Dragon Fighter Z, being pretty damn awesome. But yeah, that's why it's an easy thing to, it's an easy one to default to. I actually thought it'd be funny if there was a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure pose-off game, because I don't know if you've seen JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. One of the things people like to kind of make fun of it or be silly about it is that it has a lot of really weird poses characters end up doing. It's a very crazy anime. Like, it's Fist of the North Star.
Name like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
Yeah, it's Fist of the North Star as written by a crazy person. Now, there is 2 fighting games for it, one of which is kind of a traditional one-on-one, and the other one is a lot more open, which I think was better, because if you look at a lot of character abilities and stand abilities in that game, they don't necessarily lend themselves to one-on-one fighter very much, because some of them are very independent. Like Red Hot Chili Peppers' main factor is that it can operate independently from its user. So when you're playing Akira, you're trying to find a nice part of the map where no one's really going to bother you. You activate Red Hot Chili Pepper, and Red Hot Chili Pepper then runs around and starts attacking people. And if anyone figures out where the hell you're camping, well, you're in a lot of trouble now. But I think, trying to keep away from the fighting game genre, I thought it might be interesting to have a One Punch Man video game where you're playing as the Hero Association. So it's entirely a management-based thing. I don't know if you've heard of a game called We Are the Police. It's a game where you're playing as a police commissioner, and your job is to, satisfy City Hall, keep crime rates down, assign investigators, decide when you want to, if you have the budget to hire new people, decide if maybe you have to get rid of some people because of your budget, all that kind of stuff. So it might be interesting. Like, you can't do a fighting game of One Punch Man because part of the whole joke of the series is power escalation and how all these people are at completely different levels to each other. I mean, for starters, if you had Saitama as a character, he'd have one animation, which would be his punch, and it would win every fight. So it might be interesting to play as the Hero Association and say, okay, here's this kind of emergency. It doesn't look like that big a thing. I'm going to assign some C-class heroes to do it. Here's, this emergency. This is looking like a bit more of a thing. I'm going to put in one B-class hero, maybe one C-class to try to get things going. We have to allocate budget for repairing buildings, so maybe I shouldn't be hiring new heroes right now. It'd be fun to look at it from that side. I mean, it'd be a little less fun than, playing Genos and just beating everybody up as the badass cyborg he is. He's pretty much an android. Like, I don't know, has he still got an organic brain somewhere in there? But we've seen him ripped apart so many times. It's like, dude, you don't have, there's nothing human left about you. And like, maybe the brain.
Yeah, I like that premise a lot too. I think the one thing that I would add to it is that you can have the different threat levels kind of occurring at different times. So you know that you're going to deploy Saitama, but
the game would be too boring if you could deploy Saitama.
Well, I think that the level of threat can be so great, and it's not just like one threat at a time either. It's like, okay, we have like 6 concurrent threats.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, okay, well, Saitama is clearly going to go one, so he's kind of like your ace in the hole. Like, you know that you can rely on him to do something, but there's still some decision making that has to go into, like, okay, well, where do we deploy him? Where do we deploy our key S-class heroes? And are we willing to actually maybe not use them in order to give some of the lower heroes a chance to gain this experience?
I think it'd be a little more fun if Saitama was just an alternate game over condition. Like, if you really screwed the pooch, to the point where you couldn't do it, Saitama shows up, he wins, he walks away, and then just reflects badly on you that the Hero Association wasn't able to do this without Saitama.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So then that way there actually isn't really a game over. It's just like, like how in Heavy Rain you could really fail like a bunch and then have a failing grade by the end of it, where a bunch of people were dead, but it wasn't technically game over. Yeah, okay, I like that a lot. I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just constantly leaning on the One Punch Man, then you're not really doing your job.
Right.
But I think it might also be, and maybe this is, I'm not sure how much of opinion you have on this, but it seems in recent years, especially with anime, that there's been kind of a reverse influence where we can see anime influencing games in terms of the rule of cool, the over-the-topness, the overall design of faces, emphasis on eyes, and aesthetic-wise. There also has been the reverse true that there seems to be a lot of video game influences bleeding into anime. Many years ago, we had the Dot Hack Sign anime, which I thought was absolutely amazing. It was way better than a tie-in anime to a video game had any right to be. Like, wow. But anyways, in recent years, we had Sword Art Overhyped, which was the same plot as Dot Hack Sign, only as a harem anime. And then since then, we've seen a lot of other animes that seem to be stealing video game-related rules. Like, they're throwing out the traditional things of you eat an apple, you take time to recover, or you eat a magic sensei beam, or whatever those things were called from Dragon Ball Z, and you get better. And it's more the idea of specifically this is a healing potion. Everyone introduced themselves as a class. Like an observation I sort of made in D&D is they have a archetype for the rogue called the Arcane Trickster, which learns their spells the same way as a wizard. So why the hell couldn't an Arcane Trickster just say, introduce themselves as a wizard? They just happen to be good at picking locks. Forcing these titles onto people is very much a video game mechanic. So when someone introduces us like, hi, I'm a fighter of this expert level, it's like, it really feels like kind of a break. And it kind of worked, I guess, in Sword Art Online, since it did take place inside a virtual MMO. But we see it bleeding over into many other things. Overlord's a big example of you could have removed the video game elements from it altogether and probably had a much better anime. It's another one of those you get trapped in an anime world kind of, or in a video game world kind of things. But you really didn't need to do that. You could have just gone with typical Amnesia or something like that. You've got In Another World with My Smartphone, where you have characters introducing themselves again, like, I'm a mage, I'm a whatever, and like, oh, this is an item. Oh, you can attune to this item. That's amazing. And that, it seems to be almost a laziness in world building of just nabbing the video game mechanics. Like we were complimenting before on what anime and JRPGs kind of do, where they do build a world, do build an exciting place to do stuff. I think it was like one of the Xenogears or whatever games where two titans were locked in battle, basically delivered the killing blow on each other, and they're so freaking huge that whole civilization sprouted up on both of them.
Yeah,
how's that for a world to take place in?
That's Xenoblade Chronicles.
Yeah, like we
also
are.
the Wii Xenoblade.
Like these things are so freaking big that whole civilizations are now on top of them. We don't even know what the ground looks like anymore. But a lot of these animes, especially the isekai genre, otherwise known as the other world genre, where you get yoinked up from your world and deposited into whatever world we've just built, it seems to be taking a very lazy route these days, where it's stealing video game mechanics. It's saying we're not going to bother to build a world. You're trapped in an MMO. That's why these potions work. Or we're just going to say everyone introduce themselves as their class. Like if Dungeons and Dragons was real, I'm not going to shake your hand and say, hello, my name is Matt. I'm a Hexblade. That would be stupid.
So I have a couple of observations based on what you said there. Now I don't have the same experience as you, as I stated, but what I'm finding is that because game technology continued to develop very rapidly, we went from Centipede to Ninja Gaiden to Quest 64 to Final Fantasy 7 and 8, and now they're in a car and all that kind of stuff. And it showed the marketers and they showed the industry that there is this clear desire to project and to not only escape into another world through a text medium or a visual medium, but to then have the ability to interact with it. So the desire to, not only do I want to escape into another world, not only do I want to view another world and kind of forget about my problems, I want to be involved in solving that world's problems. And so from a marketing perspective, what I'm finding is that it seems to be this cycle of, oh, here is a show about a video game MMO. Boy, sure would be great if we made an MMO about this show, about the MMO that you can play, and then it cycles back into the show. And so it's a way to kind of like...
Defiant?
Yeah, I forgot about Defiant. Yeah, there was one idea for it. They made a TV show that tied into the MMO.
Yeah, and both tanked.
It was, would you say ahead of its time? Or was it just like not good? Because I think that's possible.
I think you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to keep a living world going on in real time to a television show, because you're going to have people who can't really follow along with the television show wondering what the hell is going on in the game, and you're probably going to have people in the game realizing that nothing you do actually affects the television show. It was a great idea, but I feel like we don't necessarily have everything readily available to make something like that work.
I will agree with you for now. I think that in time, and because the market, like the industry models do change. Like free-to-play MMOs are much more prevalent now than I think when it was so expensive just to get these things up and running.
Well, I mean, it was the first attempt to do that. So, I'm not saying it can't work. I'm just saying that was the first attempt. Didn't really go very well. Actually, wait, that may not have been the first attempt at doing sort of an augmented reality sort of, at least TV show, because you had Captain Power. Captain Power and the Soldiers of Tomorrow. The idea is that the flashing panels on the characters' outfits and on the enemies' outfits could actually be picked up by a sensor. You could buy this pack or whatever thing that you plug in for power, and you'd be trying to shoot the screen to shoot the characters, and you could get a high score by the end of the episode. So it wasn't really the first attempt. Well, it was the first attempt to really combine sort of a TV show and an MMO together, but the idea of an interactive TV show, with an external peripheral was initially tested with Captain Power, and I really need to go back and try to find those episodes, because that was a very interesting show.
Well, sure. I mean, and I think just the general point that I'm trying to make is that I mean, I don't even know how to word this, but it's like, oh, there's a video game and a TV show, and they tie in perfectly. Yeah, there's an angle there. There's a marketing angle there to try to get customers in, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and also your example of an anime that has an MMO inspiring an MMO. We haven't really seen that yet. I mean, Sword Art Online has spawned some games, but as the one I can think of off the top of my head is a single-player experience game, kind of like along the lines of Dot Hack games, whereas it takes place in an MMO, so there's like all these MMO things going on inside a single-player game. But I don't know if they're I feel like I'm going, like some of the comment sections about to bash me over the head with something I didn't look at. Look, I called it Sword Art overhyped earlier, so this kind of shows you my interest in the show. So maybe it does exist, but it would be funny if that did tie back.
I mean, because it's a speculative thing. There's only so much that that can be touched on.
Yeah.
So this is a brief thing that I want to ask you about, because you know how we do have content from Japan try to be adapted and changed into an American version, like the Dragon Ball movie. Now, the Dragon Ball movie didn't go over well for X amount of reasons, but one reason that didn't really like sit with me, that I don't really buy, and maybe you find it a fair criticism, was that they didn't use Japanese characters. I'm like, well, just proportionately speaking, Western actors do look more the part than Japanese actors. They just do. So that to me seemed more like a practical choice that happened to also make more sense from a we've done the research but not really a marketing standpoint where, okay, well, we're selling this to a Western audience, we use Western actors. More recently, was it Charlize Theron? She did the Ghost in the
Major
Shell.
Kusanagi and Ghost in the
Right,
Shell.
so same thing. It's like, okay, again, do you care about the actor or actress or whatever it is you're allowed to call them now looking like the character? Because if so, the eyes are bigger. So that to me was just like it's one of those like bullheaded points where it's like it's so obvious that I feel like an idiot for saying it, but at the same time I completely understand why people are like, no, you get Japanese people to do it. So I get both sides of it. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, I guess this is kind of going back to the whole cultural appropriation thing. But to start with your examples, because start small, then we'll work into the bigger thing. The main complaint with Dragon Ball Z is that it really had, or Evolution specifically, was it had no real adherence to the lore. So, I mean, yes, you can point to the fact they didn't really use Japanese actors, but you can also look at the fact that they didn't really represent Goku well, they didn't represent Bulma well, they didn't represent Piccolo well. I mean, Piccolo is actually a very nuanced villain from both Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. His offspring apparently has the same name as him, which screws up everything. But they
I thought
took...
his dad's name was Hilo.
Okay, but that was the big complaint there, is that they pretty much threw out years of lore of a very beloved Japanese character. Like, if they had nailed everything right but still used Western actors, I think people would be a little more forgiving to it. I think it's because it threw everything out the window and may as well have not been called Dragon Ball. It would never have existed if it wasn't called Dragon Ball. As for the Ghost in the Shell example, I think that was a very strange whole phenomenon. There was a lot of people saying you shouldn't see it because of cultural appropriation. As someone who really loved Ghost in the Shell, I felt they did not adhere to the source material properly. I do agree that Scarlett Johansson, as they dressed her up, did look a lot like the Major. The guy they picked to look like Bato did look a lot like Bato. So like there was a lot of appearance going on there, but with most of these adaptations, it again comes down to some kind of adherence to lore. And my big complaint with the new Ghost in the Shell is it seemed to be two movies going simultaneously. One that was copying the groundbreaking anime movie pretty much frame for frame in a lot of points, and another one which was a typical sort of very bog standard sci-fi movie that you would expect out of Hollywood. And they both were very uncomfortably meshed together. As somebody who'd seen the movie many, many times, it's like the original animated Ghost in the Shell is just one of the greatest movies ever made. It was very jerky to go back and forth. Like you could tell here was the one director, or it just felt like there's two directors and their scenes were just interlinked rather than properly going together. So I think it's hard to find a good, I think the closest thing to a good anime adaptation in existence, or to live action existence, would probably be Cutie Pop? Cutie Pop? Honey Pop? Oh shit. I'm gonna get murdered for not remembering this. it happened a very long time ago. It was made in Japan, and I feel like there was a lot more adherence to the zany source material. I'm gonna go home and look. Cutie Honey? No, not Cutie Honey.
I can't help you with it. I have no idea.
It was a soft parody of magical girl animes, and the original manga was slightly ecchi because, oh, she has a transformation sequence. It's not necessarily instant. But I guess trying to go back to your question, it's a hard topic to address because we've yet to actually get there. To use an example that's a little out of left field, if we look at the Ten Commandments movie that happened with Christopher Nolan and...
Oh, the Noah.
No, not
No,
Noah.
it wasn't the Noah.
Not
I think
Noah. It was...
Oh, with Christopher Nolan?
I think so. And the guy who played Batman, so I think it was Christopher Nolan as the director, and Kings of Egypt. No, not Gods of Egypt. Oh, for God's sakes. Anyways,
I know Nolan pretty well, and this would have to be a film of his that was like before Memento.
No, it was after. It was very recent. But it was a movie that took place...
No, I don't think it's Nolan. No.
But anyways,
we got the back people.
It took place in Egypt and had no Egyptian actors, and everyone was really pissed off about this. And I watched it, and other people watched it, and said, this movie is just plain bad. Like, we can get to the whitewashing issue, we can get to, like, this cultural appropriation, all that shit. It really feels secondary to the fact that this movie is god-awful. Taking it back several steps, if we go to the Dragon Ball Z movie, if they'd adhered to the lore, if they did justice to the characters, if they actually respected what the show was about and what the manga was about, which is friendship, by the way. All right, the show was about goddamn friendship and people who happen to really like to fight. Then I think people would have been a lot more forgiving to the fact that they were using American actors to play the characters. It's, at least to me, I would prefer it to be good before adhering to cultural, the cultural shit. I mean, it is from Japan, so I do respect the fact that we should be letting Japan make these old movies, but if they're going to sell the rights to Hollywood, then they know what they're getting into. Like, if a Japanese company that owns the rights to these animes, goes to Hollywood and say, hey, for this amount of money, do you want to make a live-action version of this anime? Then they know what they're getting into, and I think everyone needs to calm the fuck down. But, again, it has to be good. And if the movie is good, then I'm willing to hear people out on the whitewashing, the cultural appropriation, that kind of bullshit. But if the movie's bad, then the movie's bad. Let's move on with our lives. Let's not stand around and start whining about it. They actually interviewed a whole bunch of people in Japan when Ghost in the Shell came out. They said Scarlett Johansson looks like her. They said they're excited for the movie. They said it looks good. Like, I even, was talking to another friend who was saying, like, oh, you shouldn't see cultural appropriation. It's like, but all these people in Japan are okay with it. All these people in Japan have said it's good. Like, all these people in Japan are looking forward to it, yada, yada, yada. So if the people who are being culturally appropriated seem to be perfectly fine with this specific example of cultural appropriation, then where the hell did you get your high horse from, and can you go park it back there?
Yeah, don't speak for people like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I'd say we've covered everything that we wanted to cover. Did you have any other questions or anything else that you wanted to bring to the table?
I really hope that we can stop using it again as a dismissive term. If we go all the way back to my first example, the idea that BlazBlue, which I like it as a fighting game. I'm going to admit it's not for everybody. There are a lot of moves in that game with characters I really like that I've practiced, but never actually used in any kind of tournament or fight because it's just, you don't have time to, okay, activate hyper mode, and then, well, I have this much energy, I have to put in this, because they're really complicated, really stupid commands. So I understand people not liking it for that reason, but dismissing it based on aesthetics, dismissing it because they've got extra belts on, or the style is too, again, anime, that's just not legitimate. If you think the hair looks stupid, I agree that a lot of the hair does look stupid in BlazBlue. I will totally give you that one. But I just really hope we can eventually get to anime in general is becoming more culturally accepted. We've had all these gateway animes. We had the Pokemon series, we had Inuyasha, which was an isekai series, ironically, and now we have One Punch Man that everyone seems to be loved, and every time one of these things come out, it feels like anime gets pushed more and more to the forefront. It gets pushed more and more to something which it is okay to do. I am allowed to sit in front of the TV and watch this without my mom simultaneously accusing it of being for kids and perverts.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think just in a global cultural perspective, I think everybody is willing to dial back their local patriotism and just be more proud of what we were able to do when we come together as a world culture. It's a little bit of both, right?
Yeah. And I just want to say, because we definitely got some laughs from the crew back there, if thinking that anime is simultaneously for kids and for perverts doesn't make sense. I had that conversation with her. I got her to finally admit it doesn't make sense. And then the next time it came up again, she'd completely forgotten that I'd won that conversation.
Yeah, people. I noticed that too. People have a tendency to forget, and then just kind of like go back to the, because it's been set. It's been set in stone for so long in a person's mind. It's hard to.
Yes, but you think she'd
like-
realize her own paradox. You think she'd realize her own logic fallacy there.
I understand.
It's
I
so.
understand.
As anime becomes a little more mainstream and we get more varieties of it, some of which is more toned down, some of which is more fun, I do hope that we will stop dismissing games because they look too anime or they look like they embody that bit too much. It's a different culture. It's got its own things. We should be celebrating that's different than our stuff. We should be celebrating that's fun. And we should be willing to give it a shot. Like, if you want to try BlazBlue and he said this is too technical a fighter, that is a legitimate reason not to like BlazBlue. To say you don't like it because the characters are wearing too many belts, that's not.
Mm-hmm. And also, I just want to say that I think anime connects with people in an emotional way that I don't think other works, whether it be Western or French, do. And if you're willing to have that kind of vulnerability, it opens up a wealth of different experiences that you can have with different forms of anime. And yeah, so
It's a genre.
It's a simple point.
You can tell any story you want with it because it's just a genre. It's a way of telling it.
All right, I'd say we're ready to wrap up.
Nani?
Tyrant! Smash Brothers Super X! That's the only thing I can say in Japan. I just said Super Smash Brothers Melee.
I say said what you were saying.
Oh, right, yes. I'm sorry, I forgot. I forgot. Nani is what?
Yeah, okay.
Arigato. Hajimasu. Okay, no, that's
Okay,
just fine. I don't want to actually pretend like we have the authority
Yeah,
to end
that's-
on in Japanese. No, I just want to say thank you as always to, or should I say, arigato? No, okay.
Okay,
Thanks.
little too far.
Yeah, thank you to the XSN for hosting us, as
Yeah.
always. You guys are very good at this. Very good at this.
I hope we weren't hitting the mics too much.
We probably were a little bit because how many more? I mean, again, it was the anime episode.
Yeah.
Okay.
You